Okay. First of all, let me thank the organizers for inviting me here to this conference. The topic of my presentation today is crowd investing and how we should or should not regulate it in the future. So let me jump right into the topic. What is crowd investing? So crowd investing is usually, or the essence of crowd investing is usually the idea of having a large group of investors spending small amount of money to invest into a startup company or also a medium-sized company. So usually what happens is that the investors do not engage in the crowd or with the crowd investing portal into an interaction. They are pledging a certain amount of money, and if a certain threshold is met, let's say 50,000 euros or dollars or something like that, then financial trust will wire the money to the startup company, as you can see here in my slides. And as you can also see, the investors in crowd investing might have deep pockets and might be well in the position to diversify their portfolio, but it could also be that they have very small pockets, and then it might be difficult for them to have a diversified portfolio. On the other hand, you have the issuer, which is usually a startup company, and this again might be either smart guys, but it could also be that these are simply frauds and it's very difficult for the investor to find out. So if the startup company can raise a certain amount of money, then the money will be wired to the issuer, and the crowd investing portal, which is putting the campaign on their website, will receive a share which can be up to 10%, depending on the portal and also depending on the amount of the issue. Also, the trust, which is handling the money, will also receive another share up to 2%. So the big question in crowd investing is whether there has to be information disclosure or not. So in most of the cases, what you see is that firms do not disclose information or do not register a statement or a prospectus according to securities regulation. And so what you can ask is, why do we actually need this crowd investing portal? So the crowd investing portal is providing the issuer or the startup firm with an investor network. So the issuer might not know where to raise the capital if they don't go to this platform. So the crowd investing portal sends an email letter to the investors, and thus informs the investors about this crowd investing campaign. It also provides a standardized financial contract to both the issuer and the investor, which is not negotiable. It's just provided by the portal. And it also provides an investor relations channel to the investors, where they can pre or post of the investment debate with the issuer and ask for information. So if all goes well, the investors will in the end obtain a financial return. And this is really the difference to crowdfunding, which you might know from Kickstarter and so on. Because here in crowd investing, investors are investing into a startup firm, and they don't donate the money or want to get a particular return. They really ask for a financial return in the end. So that's the main difference to crowdfunding. So now you might ask, why should we regulate this activity? And I first want to suggest 5 pros for this activity to promote it. This is not a complete list, but I think these are the most important arguments. First of all, you could say that startups have a problem raising money because they could be too risky for banks, they are too small for venture capitalists, and they could be too big for family and friends to step in. So it could be the case that there is a potential funding gap, and I will provide some evidence on that later on. Also, firms which are not startup firms, which could be intermediate firms, might have a problem because of financial constraints, for instance, when the banking sector is under pressure, as was the case in the financial crisis. So in this case, again, crowd investing might step in and provide an alternative source of funding. Third, crowd investing can also overcome geographical barriers. So that is, if you are an entrepreneur, you probably know that in the US, if you want to obtain capital, what you do is you go to the Silicon Valley, and you know that most of the venture capital funds will be around there. But on the other hand, if you are a venture capitalist, it might be much more difficult for you to find out who or where the startups are. So crowd investing is providing a platform where both come together, just like in a city as Berlin or the Silicon Valley in the US. Furthermore, crowd investing might also provide information ex ante about your product. So because crowd investors are potential consumers, you might get information on the demand of your product early on, And if that doesn't work out, like if no one is willing to invest in your company, then it might also be not a good product because people are just not that interested in your product. It's also a form of early advertising, so that might also be a benefit of engaging in crowd investing. Finally, we know from retail stock orders that retail investors are quite good in investing in or providing the capital market with information. So here again, the crowd might be very good in selecting the right startups because something such as the wisdom of the crowd might exist. We don't know about that, but it might be a potential reason why you want to promote this activity. So summing up, crowd investing can play an important role in job creation and also economic development. So is there evidence for financial constraints in crowd investing? What you see here are crowd investing campaigns in Germany, and the black candlesticks give you the campaigns that have been run in Germany, and they all raise up to 100,000 euros. This is just the exemption of the securities regulation where you don't have to file a prospectus. So this really tells you that all the startups making use of the exemption of the small prospect or of the small offerings exemption, and at a certain time firms figured out, or the portal figured out, that they could issue a different type of financial security. And once they did that, they could raise larger amounts of money without filing a prospectus. So what you see is, after they introduced this new type of financial security, the amounts that have been raised were much larger, and also the red candlesticks indicate startups that raised a second round. So they raised 100,000 in the first round with the first type of financial security, and once the portal implemented a different financial contract, they were able to raise again a larger amount of money. So you have kind of evidence that firms have been constrained in the first phase when they only could issue up to 100,000 euros. Okay, what might speak against such an activity? First of all, here again there are 5 arguments which speak against crowd investing, or why crowd investing should be regulated more intensely. First of all, there is an adverse selection problem in crowd investing. Public information disclosure might attract only those startups which are not particularly innovative, and that is because crowd investing is very transparent. So think about it, if you provide all the information of your firm on an internet platform, it's either very hard for a competitor to copy you, or on the other hand, it could be that it's just not worth copying your idea. So if that is the case, then you only have very bad firms raising money in crowd investing. The second problem is also common to other types of financial securities, which is information asymmetries, and this is because the crowd cannot really assess the quality of the venture and the quality of the entrepreneur. This is different from venture capital because in venture capital, the venture capitalist can go into the firm, find out about the entrepreneur, but the crowd investor only sees the information on the platform, so it's very difficult for him to assess whether it's a good or bad entrepreneur. This problem is even more severe due to the fact that in crowd investing there's a severe free rider problem. This is because if you pledge a very small amount of money, which could be $5 or something, then it's very difficult for you to engage in a due diligence or to have a post-investment monitoring of the firm, because it's simply too high transaction costs to do that. So, and you might rely simply on other investors who have pledged higher amounts of money to do that for you. But they might equally think it's not worth for them because transaction costs are simply too high. In general, you have to consider that crowd investing startups are very high risk firms. They have low survival rates in general, and you could say that around 20% of the firms will fall out within a year. And the final and fifth argument, which speaks somewhat against crowd investing, is that these are very illiquid securities. They have all a long term of 4 to 7 years. So the holding period for you as an investor is actually very risky. So you cannot sell the security for a very long period. So summing that up together, the problem with crowd investing is that it's much more complex than crowdfunding. You have much more difficult relationships with the investor and the entrepreneur. You're not just donating money, and if it doesn't turn out well, you say, I didn't donate in the right project, because here you have an expectation of obtaining a financial return in the end. Okay, so how big is the market? We have data on 2012 for crowdfunding, which also includes crowd investing. And what you can see is that the largest market share is in North America, mostly in the US, and mostly by Kickstarter. So this is 2/3 of the market are coming from the US. Another third is in Europe, and only 4% is by the rest of the world. So in total, we have $2.7 billion in crowdfunding in 2012. But if you divide that up by the different types of crowdfunding, you can see that the largest share comes from P2P lending. That is, you extend a loan to a company or to a private consumer, you donate money, or you get a certain reward, which could be you will be named on the end of a movie, or your name will appear on the cover of a CD or something like this. In crowd investing, the red column is just a very small part of the market yet. However, if you look at the growth rates in the last years, you can see that they are pretty high, at least in the UK and in Germany, where crowd investing is currently possible, and they're above 300 and 400%, and they're also increasing even more in 2014. So what have the regulators done so far? So the US was the first to regulate equity crowdfunding. We call it crowd investing because it's not really equity that is issued in most of the cases. And what they have done is they offered a new exemption to the securities law where you can offer up to $1 million without filing a prospectus or registration statement in the US. However, this will depend on the maximum amount that can be sold to an investor, and investors can invest up to $2,000 or $100,000 depending on their annual income or net wealth. The US also regulated the gatekeepers as funding portal or broker-dealer, and they require some disclosure from the firms. However, this law has not been implemented, as Title III of the Jobs Act still has to be implemented by the SEC. Italy also increased the exemption from the small offerings exemption from 100,000 to 5 million euros. However, this is only feasible for innovative startups. And Italy defines an innovative startup as a firm which either has a patent related to their business activity, or 1/3 of the workforce has a PhD in science, or 1/3 of the founders have to have a PhD in science. So it's a very tricky law and very difficult to fulfill, which also led to the fact that not a lot of startups have engaged in crowd investing yet in Italy. Austria only raised the small offering exemption from 100,000 to 250,000 euros. The UK kept the limit by 5 million. However, they also regulated the maximum amount that can be sold to investors, which is 10% of the net investable financial assets investors can invest in crowd investing. Furthermore, in the UK, people now, or retail investors now, have to get financial advice, which might be a bad thing for crowd investing, because the whole thing about crowd investing is that you might have something like the intelligence of the crowd, and if you get financial advice by a particular person, this person might make mistakes in a specific way, and this mistake will just carry on and on. So France and Germany also raised the amount of the small offering exemption to 1 million euros. And in Germany, the maximum you can invest as an investor now is 10,000 euros to a particular project. However, here again, there might be a problem because you're separating the crowd from sophisticated investors, which might be problematic because sophisticated investors might contribute in a specific way by conducting due diligence or engaging in financial contracting and so on. So what are my policy recommendations? So first of all, I think crowd investing portals have the best incentives to build a reputation because they are repeat players, and I think if you should regulate someone, it's not the investors, it is really the crowd investing portals. I think the crowd investing portals should perform such tasks as due diligence, and they should also be held liable for that. Second, to combat fly-by-night operations, I think crowd investing portals should derive their revenues not from issuing a successful campaign, because then they would only maximize the number of campaigns on the portal. I think what they should do is they should derive their revenues from successful exits. Because in this way, what you could do is bring the incentives of the investor in line with the portal incentives. Third, I think setting a cap on aggregate investments separates the crowd from professional investors. And I think that is a problem because the crowd might actually be in a position to piggyback on the efforts of angel investors or venture capitalists, and that might improve financial contracting and also monitoring. Because right now, there are no covenants in these contracts. Also, there's no staged finance, so it's just a one-shot financial contract. And finally, let me conclude. I think if you let the crowd piggyback on angel investors, you have different problems such as minority and majority shareholder conflicts in crowd investing. However, I think this can be addressed by securities regulation. Thank you very much.